Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. Happy virtual CES. Rich and I hope you and your families are all doing well and coping in these historically crazy and difficult times. We plan to fill the next hour with a little mirth and perhaps some insight, at least from Rich. We are pleased to do this as part of GlobalVC Sports, and we appreciate the tireless efforts of Jeff Volk and his colleagues to put today's outstanding program together. Jeff recognized early the opportunity for sports startups in New York City, and that energy has spread throughout the country and now the world as well. Yesterday, Rich Greenfield and his partners at Lightshed Partners, Walter Piecyk and Brandon Ross, unveiled their top 21 for 2021 predictions. You can find them at lightshedtmt.com as well as on NYBC Sports. These predictions have become a fixture at CES time. Rich is perhaps the most widely quoted analyst in technology, media, and telecom. He is also one of the most outspoken. While many disagree with him, everyone I know reads him. If you have questions for Rich and me, please send them to me on Twitter today at @JKosner, Kosner, and I will try to get to them. So Rich, welcome.
Thanks for having me, John.
Before we get to the specific predictions, what has year two been like for Lightshed Partners? Challenges, opportunities for you, Brandon, and Walt?
I think the biggest thing, John, is that we know the idea that we're not all together. I think this remote work is sort of just so odd, right? Not seeing other humans in the same way. Traditionally, you and I would be standing at the Encore tonight, having a drink, talking about sort of what to think about for 21. We would be having sort of a broad discussion with a lot of other industry executives. And I think the fact that we're all essentially sitting at home, maybe a few of us sitting in empty offices, but that we're all sitting at home is sort of just that whole challenge of sort of removing all travel, removing all sort of direct human interaction. And I think for me, the hardest part, what I love the most about CES, I didn't love going to Vegas. I didn't love waiting for Ubers and all of that. What I loved about Vegas is that you and I would be standing at a cocktail party and we would run into somebody, right? Somebody would bump into us and say, "Hey, John," and you would go, "Hey, do you know Rich Greenfield?" or vice versa. And like the serendipity of meeting other people, which I know, the Global Sports VC, I've spoken at events there and met new people. There's no serendipity in this world of Zoom. It's great to do this, and I love doing it with you and with Jeff and talking to lots of other people that obviously I can't see and bump into in the same way. But I really miss that sort of serendipity of meeting new people and building out my network of people that I know and love talking to. And that's what I think has been the most challenging part of this year, to me at least.
I totally agree. In that context, I know you were burning the midnight oil last couple of days coming up with 21 predictions. Before we get to
sometime we're going to go back and start. Originally, it was a top 10. And someday we're going to go back to 10 because it's just there's too many years that are building up. Like, it's crazy.
You're making it into too much work at this point. But
I know.
I'm interested, before we go through some of the specific ones, and not just COVID, but what did you feel were some of the key things that had changed when you were doing this exercise this year versus a year ago?
Well, I probably think that, when you look at what's happened from a regulatory standpoint, right? There has definitely been, I'd say, political/regulatory. There has been a lot of thought that's gone into sort of how the world is changing, right? We've got companies that are being, antitrust investigations into Facebook and Google. We've got Section 230, which, well, I don't think it goes anywhere. The idea of sort of removing sort of the core tenets of how the internet functions. We've had TikTok almost kicked out of after having the most explosive growth of any media company in 2020. There was a time in September where TikTok employees didn't know if there was going to be a tomorrow, like literally a tomorrow.
Right.
So you think about, leaving aside the pandemic, which is obviously impossible to, given it's impacted essentially every business that we look at. But I think the political regulatory climate under the current administration that's obviously changing shortly, or seemingly changing shortly, that has been something that has really altered and impacted how we thought about the sector and has led us to do a lot. There's been a lot of work and thought that's gone into how does it really impact the coverage universe.
Totally. So one theme that runs through your predictions is streaming. Okay. Is it safe to say that 2020, the pandemic year, is a sort of line of demarcation between the linear TV world that you and I grew up with and the brave new world that's coming?
I think that's right, because I think if you were to step back in time, there was a lot of debate. The hashtag we came up with a long time ago called Good Luck Bundle. And it was we were sort of a heretic years ago when we came up with it, and everyone sort of laughed. And, obviously nobody's laughing anymore about sort of the challenges and headwinds facing the cable bundle. But I think what sort of changed in 2020 is that you sort of really got the reality that you had to go to streaming, right? Like everything was moving to streaming. And I don't even just mean the traditional video business. I mean, obviously HBO Max launched last year and Peacock launched, but I think it was like, Discovery coming out in the end of 2020 and saying, we're doing streaming now. And it obviously just launched last week with Discovery Plus, but like everybody, I mean, if you think about, go back to the old David Zaslav quote when he was at NBC, sort of, the digital dimes for dollars, and sort of like you think about sort of how this industry has changed and how everybody now is embracing streaming. I think it's everyone now gets that if you're not on the streaming bandwagon, you're going to disappear. So I think that is a big part of it. But I think, John, the answer to your question is actually, it's even bigger than that, because of the pandemic, other businesses in media have shown the power of streaming, right? Like the movie business, essentially. I mean, I was walking in Manhattan last night. The movie theaters are still all closed, right? There's just literally nobody there and they're closed. Boarded up. And so the movie industry has had to think about, well, we've got all of this content. How do we get it to consumers? You saw what Warner Brothers did. I listened to Ann Sarnoff at CES earlier this morning from Warner Brothers. Like the movie industry has recognized that, yes, they still want to do movie theaters whenever they reopen, but there's a way to reach consumers, billions of consumers all over the world, with streaming. And so streaming is providing an outlet, not just for the traditional television business, but other industries like the movie business are quickly realizing how big of an opportunity this is. And while it's very different and it's very disruptive to everyone's existing business models and very often job functions, I think 2020 for many, many reasons illustrates the point you're making, which is this is that clear inflection point for this industry. 2020, there's no looking back. We're not going back to the bundle. We're not going back to movie theaters in the same way. The world is pivoting to streaming. And you know what? Consumers love it. I mean, this is great for the consumer.
Yeah. So looking forward, when you think about streaming, let's talk about entertainment companies first. What's necessary to win? Because we're ultimately not going to have 15 to 20 of these. We're going to have some form of consolidation. So what's necessary to win?
Well, first of all, I might take a step back and say there's probably going to be lots of players, right? I mean, they're just going to be different sizes and scales, right? I mean, yeah. Crunchyroll has been out there for a long time. It's Japanese anime, and it's got 3 million plus subscribers. And, I think if you're talking about who can be quote unquote winners, right? I mean, if we're talking about true winners, my guess is that there's going to be a few, right? There'll be a handful. I mean, I think we probably all agree, and I'm sure most people watching here probably view Netflix as a winner. I think it's hard not to deny that Disney will be a winner, but Disney's probably a winner in a different context, meaning even Disney will probably consolidate what it's doing into one larger shot on goal over time. HBO Max, it's funny, I saw an ad for Snowpiercer the other day on HBO Max, and that was a big turner, I think a TBS or TNT title last year. But now it's being shown on HBO Max, and I think it just shows you how each of these media companies is realizing they got to take all of their brands. I mean, look at Discovery Plus. It's not just the Discovery Channel. The name is almost a bad name because it's not Discovery Channel. It's Discovery, and Food Network and TLC and Home and Garden. It's putting every single Discovery property into one. So I think what you're going to see is everyone is realizing this is a scale game. CBS All Access is morphing into Paramount Plus, which includes all the Viacom networks and their movie studio. And so, long-winded way of saying, like, I think there's going to be real consolidation among all of these brands where everyone takes their biggest possible shot on goal. But you're right. Many of these are probably still not big enough, right? Like Viacom ultimately, are they going to be more successful with CBS All Access merging into Paramount Plus? Sure. But do they probably need over time even more brands and scale? I mean, we wrote a piece back in October, or maybe it was November now, probably November, basically saying that even HBO Max and Peacock, honestly, are not big enough. I mean, think about when you say, what does it take to win? Think about what Disney's done. Like The Mandalorian, Star Wars, Marvel, Lucasfilms, Pixar, like they are clearly showing you what it takes to be successful in streaming. And even Disney, in just the last 12 months, has realized that the amount you have to spend is dramatic, billions upon billions of dollars. I mean, it's funny. If I was sitting around with a bunch of industry executives, traditional legacy media executives a year ago, 18 months ago, many of them would have said, Netflix just wastes money. Like they spend $15 billion on content. They could spend half of that. They're just wasting money. And then you look at Disney, within 12 months, they go from, hey, we're going to spend $4 billion, we're going to ramp to $4 billion, to we're going to ramp to $8 billion. And my guess is by the time they get there, they're going to be spending $16 billion, right? Like everyone is realizing that, to your point, it's a scaled content game. You need to have tons of content to attract consumers or subscribers. You need a lot of content to drive the price, like to increase the value perception so that you can raise price. I mean, Netflix raised price at the end of last year. Nobody even complained because there's so much content. Nobody complains. The first time they raised price, when they went from $7.99 to $8.99, it was like the world came to an end. They were front page New York Times art, like it was everywhere. Awful company. Can't believe they're raising price. How dare they? Now it's like, this is a great value. You can't get rid of Netflix. There's going to be 70 movies on Netflix in 2020, let alone all this TV content. I mean, everyone's watching Bridgerton right now from Shonda Rhimes. Like it's the #1 show in the country right now. Like, so I think as you start to realize how much scale is needed, that you're going to lead to necessary is going to be consolidation. So I think, an HBO a Warner Media, NBC Universal deal, I mean, it just makes sense. And then you go, well, if NBC Universal and HBO make sense, and the egos and the personalities may not be ready to do that deal yet, but the reality is if they're not big enough, and remember, let's step back, because a company well, John, called Disney thought they weren't big enough, right? Which is why they went out and got Fox and fought really hard, right? Like literally went to the mat, raising price multiple times to win Fox. So that was Disney telling you, we're not big enough to compete against Netflix without more scale. I think that kind of sends a signal to everybody else. Nobody else is big enough. They're all going to need to get more scale, more franchises, more brands to really be competitive long term.
And this brings up also just the importance of library. Number 13 in your predictions is what happens with MGM.
Yep. And I think, you think about that asset, and I mean, I think in our careers, John, how many times has MGM been for sale and traded hands? I mean, probably more time. I mean, more than I have fingers on my hand. I mean, I remember the Alex Yemenigian days. Like, I mean, this thing gets sold over and over, Krikorian, et cetera. But, ultimately, you do need lots of, it's not just about having new content. It's about having all forms of content. I mean, right? Kids content matters a lot. Multicultural content matters a lot. Library matters a lot, like, because it's not just having the hit new show, it's keeping people entertained and the whole family entertained every single day. I mean, it's also the globalization of the business. I mean, I think what's really been interesting for me to watch, and we probably should have written more about it in our top 21, just because it happened yesterday, and it was probably the most shocking thing I've seen. A French television show called Lupin, Lupin, hit #3 in the US on Netflix yesterday. So it's a French TV show made for a French audience with French talent. dubbed into English or subtitled. That was the number 3 most popular show behind Bridgerton and Cobra Kai on Netflix yesterday. And I think that just shows you that like the globalization of this business and the diversity of content that's going to be needed to win, to your point on kind of MGM and sort of the value of building up as much content, and is not just the content, not the existing shows, but also the underlying IP. I mean, if you think about Disney, Guardians of the Galaxy was not why they bought Marvel, but they bought it for obviously Iron Man and all of the major titles. But the reality is, when you buy companies with deep catalogs, you stumble upon other titles that can be rebuilt or recreated or leveraged off of, or sub characters that were in one of these properties. And all of a sudden, I mean, that to me is like, I was thinking about Bond. Bond is something that there's a movie every 3 to 4 years. We all know, I mean, from Sean Connery up to where we are now, like you think about Daniel Craig and all throughout the years. Why is there no like larger Bond? I mean, there is no Bond TV series. There is no Bond digital presence. There's no, like, Bond doesn't really live in its own world. I mean, Harry Potter has this huge theme park, right, in multiple places. And I don't know, it sort of just strikes me that if you think about what MGM could be with the right owners, and again, we said it was Comcast. I could make an argument why it should be Warner Media. I mean, I could make an argument really why anybody would want to own it at a right price, obviously. Right. But the concept of having more IP to comb through, looking at the world we're going into, it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of IP.
Yeah. What do you let's talk about sports and streaming, because sports, of course, has been sort of the bastion of the pay TV universe, and that's supported the whole industry. Do you see entertainment streamers who don't have sports beginning to add sports? Do you see those who do, like Peacock, doing more sports as we go forward?
The problem with sports, as you know better than anyone, is the cost of sports is so extremely high. The entry fee is so large for everyone. I mean, I don't know exactly what the NFL rights are going to go for, but I presume that Sunday afternoon will go from $1 billion to $2 billion, if not more, with lots of competition, right? Now, I mean, these numbers are tremendous. And so, we've seen lots of players dabble, right? I mean, DAZN, right, tried to go from, nowhere to entering the US with a boxing contract, and then live look-ins to Major League Baseball games that, to me, it's like, it hasn't worked. I mean, it just honestly, and, I mean, John Skipper and the team over there, they're very successful historically, but I don't think it's worked. And I think it's because the scale necessary to be a major player in sports streaming is really expensive. The companies that should do it, right? I mean, if the obvious companies that should do it, you would go, oh, Netflix should do it, right? They have 200 million subscribers. It's obvious, like they've conquered TV, they've conquered or entertainment, they've conquered film. They should do sports. But then you look at it and you go, the majority of Netflix's subscribers are global. Sports rights are not just market by market, but they're exceedingly expensive. The content basically only has value for the hour to 3 hours that it plays out. Then there's no value. There's no catalog value. The whole catalog value you and I were just talking about, sports doesn't have that.
No.
Sports is a great battering ram. Like if you need to attract subscribers, sports is amazing, right? But Netflix doesn't have trouble attracting subscribers. That's not their problem. Amazon Prime is certainly using sports. They're dabbling, right? I mean, they've got lots of what I would call relatively small deals in the scheme of a $1 trillion company. They certainly have not made the big inroad. I mean, you saw them do a playoff game, right? Or sorry, they did the last week of the regular season. They did that game a couple of weeks ago. They've been a simulcaster on Thursday night. They've done tennis. They've done international, rights for the U.S. Open. Lots of little things. I think we're waiting for one of the tech companies to step up. I think it's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months, where you start to see companies like Amazon take a bigger stab at sports rights. But in terms of like an existing company, and you mentioned Peacock, like Peacock doesn't even have the NFL yet. I presume they will have the NFL in the new renewal, that they'll basically replicate what CBS All Access, soon to be called Paramount Plus, does, where you get the live feed of the games on Sunday afternoon as part of that. But I don't think that's a huge game changer. I mean, if you think about it from CBS All Access's point, I'm sure there's some people that sign up for CBS All Access just for the NFL. But if you're a diehard NFL fan, it's not like CBS All Access satiates you, right?
Right.
You really need the bundle. I mean, if you're a diehard sports fan, to your point in the very beginning of this segment, you got to be a bundled subscriber because the only place to get all of sports is the big bundle. The problem the bundle has is that if you're not a sports fan,
right,
the best content is no longer actually in the bundle. The best content is on Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Hulu, etc. And you don't need a bundle for that. And so I think sports is sort of the only reason the bundle sort of exists. And I mean, at some point, I'm sure you'll wake up and Apple will do something huge in sports. But my guess is most of these companies are really right now primarily focused on building out their entertainment content. And that, if you think about dollars, yes, you could clearly say Apple could do both, right? Apple could build out entertainment and do sports at the same time. They have the capital. It's not a money problem. But my guess is you're going to build up on entertainment. It has lots of library value. It works all over the world. And then you'll turn to sports at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, look, sports rights are starting to go down. I mean, Major League Baseball had a down deal, right? I mean, we haven't really seen down deals in the US. I know it's happened with Premier League rights in the UK, but we haven't seen down deals for a major sports league in the US until then.
Well, let's talk about the big kahuna here, and you get to it. I think it's number 2 in your predictions. Seems to me like what's holding the bundle together isn't so much sports, it's the NFL. And the NFL appears to play, the NFL appears to play in a league of its own. So what do you see these deals coming down, relatively soon this year? What's different? You looked at the same exercise a year ago.
Yeah. I think that everybody who's in the TV business, as much as we can talk about cord cutting and the headwinds facing advertising, the reality is the entire bundle collapses without the NFL. None of the companies that we look at, ESPN without the NFL, I don't think is viable. Not the other sports just aren't powerful enough. If you think about what would happen to CBS, to Viacom, if CBS didn't have the NFL, the reality is while these businesses are facing real long-term headwinds, in order to kind of kick the can down the road, they don't have a choice. They have to go in and spend as much as possible to keep these rights. Again, it doesn't fix the long-term problem of they've all got to pivot to the internet. They've all got to pivot to streaming. They've all got to figure out a new way forward because, you look at the math on something like ESPN. If there's only 50 million subscribers in 5 years to the bundle, and sports rights for Monday Night Football go from 2 billion, 2.5, 2.6, let alone 3 billion, whatever the number is.
Right.
You're upside down unless you get rid of every other sports contract you have. You're upside down on profitability in 5 years. And so they've got to figure out a future. But the idea of not having the NFL would accelerate the demise at such a speed. I think the reality is they'll overspend for the NFL one more time and try to figure out a future. Now, the real question that I think that you're leading into is, what does the NFL exactly do? Because if their partners are in trouble over the next 5 years, 6 years, they're going to get one more great contract. So let's just say the new contract starts in 2023 and it's a 5-year deal.
How about a 10-year deal?
It's possible. I mean, that would certainly be in the NFL's interest. I think the reason not to do it is you probably hope over the next 5 years, 6 years, by 2027, 2028, you probably hope that the digital players are finally ready to do sports. If not, you got a much bigger problem anyway, right?
I just think a ginormous problem there is that the big digital companies that could play, you mentioned Amazon, Google, YouTube, Apple, they already have billions of active customers. One of the reasons, again,
meaning it can't be a battering ram.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we at media companies would acquire NFL rights is because it defines us as a network. It's a reason to be. You certainly add engagement, you add any number of other ancillary opportunities for these big companies, but they don't have to do it. Whereas you'd argue that for media companies right now, you have to do it. That's the conundrum.
Correct. And that is the and it's also what what's also really dangerous, John, about that, in my mind, is let's say Apple bought Monday Night Football. We certainly know Apple, with or without Monday Night Football, is going to survive. So it's not like you get so addicted. Like, I would say that the media companies that you and I follow and looked at for years and you've worked within, they're addicted. It's like the needle's all the way in, right? Like they're fully addicted. They can't get off the drug. We know that if you sell rights, if you kill your old partners, kill the ones that are on the drug right now, embrace your new partners. As you just said, the new partners, it's not critical to them. Like, it could be interesting. They could try it, but it certainly isn't mission critical. I think that if you're sports leagues, not just the NFL, if you're any sports league, your single biggest concern right now is that you're not critical to tech the way you were critical to the TV ecosystem. And there's no way to fix that. And so everybody that's in the sports business, ownership of teams, leagues, they need to be thinking about what are the new revenue streams? Because my gut is, over this coming decade, media rights will not do what media rights have done over the past decade. That doesn't mean there aren't new ways to monetize that could be very lucrative.
Right.
And I don't know how highlights and social and digital and AR, I mean, there's lots of things we can dream up on a whiteboard. None of them, obviously, they all pale in comparison to the economic model of the cable bundle, historically, and media rights. But that's to me, that is, if I was sitting in the conference rooms at these owners meetings, this would be my number one concern of, like, forget about the next couple of years. Even if deals go down a little bit, the next couple of years is fine. What is the long-term plan?
Yeah. But you're sketching out a scenario here where the NFL, again, because it is just appointment viewing in a way that nothing else is poised to take a even bigger chunk out of a shrinking ecosystem. So even in the next couple of years, you guys mentioned hockey. I've been bullish on sort of hockey's prospects, but you not so much. And the reality is there's less money in the system once the
Correct.
NFL gets done.
And look, if the NFL gets done at a big number, people are going to have to cut elsewhere, right? I mean, that your subscribers to the multi-channel bundle, I don't know, 77, 78 million, you're down from 100. All signs are pointing, I mean, these companies are getting on public conference calls talking about the bottom being 50 to 60 million. So it means you got another 25 million plus subscribers, almost 30 million subscribers to go down over the course of the next, let's just say, 5 years. If costs are going up for the NFL, I think that has to come out of the other. And again, we're not just talking what you think of as traditional sports. I mean, this could also be things like WWE, right? I mean,
everything, right? Yeah,
it's everything. It's
right.
It's all live events that are on TV. It could be
Right.
the Oscars, the Emmys, like anything that is sort of, quote, live is probably at risk. And look, when you look at what happened 2 nights ago, I mean, we're stuck in the middle of a pandemic. I know Alabama's played like 37 times in the finals, but the fact that the finals for college football, the CFP, was down to the lowest level ever recorded between BCS and CFP, the viewership was just so bad. There was nothing else on television. It's not like that night was an overly political news night. I mean, I know it's been a very volatile week, but it wasn't like that night had crazy news flow that would have driven news viewership relative to historically. And the ratings were bad. And it's like, it's something that's become sort of, it's almost becoming accepted, right? Like every single thing, World Series, NBA Finals, and yes, there's time shifting to deal with, but like across the board, I think the biggest surprise of 2020, if you think about like think about when we talked right at the beginning of the pandemic, you and I, we would have assumed with everyone stuck at home, whenever sports came back, we would have assumed bonkers ratings for sports, right? Like you got nothing else to do, but it hasn't played out. I mean, TV has been a real disappointment for sports over the course of the last 6 or 7 months as they've come back. And we can come up with lots of explanations, but when you see something like last night, it just hits it home again of like something's wrong, right? Like there's just two great teams.
Something's changing. I mean, something's changing that affects it. In your predictions, you talk about the importance of interactivity in the TV experience.
Look, I've seen it in my own kids.
Yeah.
My kids, the amount of video game time spent in 2020 caused, you can literally, you talk about demarcation lines. The pandemic changed their adoption of video gaming without a doubt. Like, they'd always played video games, but the use of video games, and I don't just mean playing, like playing a game passively, but I mean playing a game with their friends, like all their friends on a Zoom, they're all talking, or all their friends on Discord, and they're talking to their friends while they're playing the game. Sort of the social hangout nature of video gaming. I don't see the same thing happening with sports viewership. It just doesn't exist.
I have a friend named Jay Moses who's on the board at Take-Two, which is a terrific gaming company, and he made the point to me, which we put in an article, that if you look at TikTok, which has been, as you said, a spectacular success, a lot of the underlying sort of experience is based upon gaming mechanics. It's a fundamental change that's going on. Also, in your piece, you mentioned just the important growth of creator economy, which is fueled by, I have a 13-year-old, and he's more interested in the followers he can get on his cooking blog and other stuff than necessarily just watching a football game with me. And I think it also brings up the challenge that over time, sports has to integrate the kind of activity you see on Twitch and other channels, which is how most young people are watching and interacting with content today.
Well, just you and I were going back and forth on Twitter over the weekend, looking at what Nickelodeon did.
Yeah.
And yes, it wasn't interactive, so I don't want to misspeak, but it showed a new take to sort of play into, make it feel like more like a video game, make it feel more creative and entertaining, and the slime in the end zone. And look, I'm sure a regular football diehard probably wanted to vomit watching that, right? I mean, that was not your typical way of watching a football game. But for an audience that has grown up playing Fortnite and lives and breathes Among Us and Roblox and Minecraft, it was pretty interesting. And the numbers, 2 million viewers. And I have to believe a lot of that was incremental viewers, because I don't think you were choosing to watch Nick over watching CBS.
Yeah.
And I know it's a novelty and they promoted it hard, but just the idea that there's ways of sort of engaging youth in watching, because if you're not watching these sports as a youth, the odds that you're going to watch and you're older are obviously very low. And so I think to me, that was interesting. But I think what you're saying is, how do you take it a step further? How do you make this more interactive? And, the challenge is like the pace at which the TV companies move, and that, how much of the hardware, yes, X1 is fairly advanced hardware in Comcast, but even X1 can't do what an Apple TV or a Roku box can do. It took 6 months to launch HBO Max on an X1 box. They're just not, it's very hard to innovate for these platforms. And there's so many platforms that doing things, this is not easy to do. And so I do think that, it's critical. I also don't know for sports, what do people actually want to do? Like, what do you want to do on your phone versus what do you want on the TV? Is it a two-screen experience? Is it a single screen experience? Even sports betting, like, I don't really think you want a sports bet on your TV. It hasn't worked in the UK for Sky. Where it works is on your phone, right? Like, you're sitting with your phone and it's really easy to place bets. Nobody really wants to do that on their television screen. It's cumbersome. You've used your TV remote. Would you want to be placing bets and logging into websites on your TV? The answer is no.
No, I think you're going to see much more emphasis on group viewing. I think that, you're going to have to get the latency down. That's the biggest thing that I miss is I'd like to be able to watch a game with you. And let's say there's a plus button up on the screen and we can click and we can watch it, the same experience, and talk about it.
But that requires a couple things, not just the latency going down, right? But that also requires, you've got to have a camera on top of your television, right? You've got to have good enough bandwidth to actually have that be a good two-way experience. And, Verizon has amazing upstream. Cable companies just are notorious for not having as good of an upstream. Right. And so that kind of live video quality isn't as good. And I agree. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think audio only works. I think it's going to have to be like we're watching. Like if we put the game inside of Zoom and we were watching the game
Yeah.
the way you share your screen in Zoom, that would be pretty awesome. Now, that hasn't happened. I mean, I think it's actually one of the things we talked about in that Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic. It was like, why doesn't somebody create this experience of like, hey, we're all watching the NFL game?
Yeah.
Nobody did it, John. Nobody.
No, I know. I mean, separately, Ben Thompson, the tech writer, mentioned that when they did their fantasy basketball draft this year, they did it in Zoom, which I thought was a brilliant thing. It made me, it's painful for me because it's the kind of thing I would have loved to see us do. I want to get to, you talked about growth of platforms. One of the most fascinating, and you cover it here, to me, is Roku. As
Yes.
I was looking this morning, market cap of $53 billion. So talk a little bit about that company, what they're up to, what you see.
I think if there's one big theme for 21 that everyone needs to think about, 2020 was certainly the inflection point for the programmers shifting to streaming. 2021, I think, is all about the war for the living room. I mean, the war for the connected TV, right? I mean, this is who controls your media life. And you've got big companies. Roku clearly is in the pole position. I mean, there's no doubt with 50 million plus households now using Roku on a monthly basis, like they have become the leader. You've got Amazon, clearly with Fire TV that wants to be a major player. You've got Google, which has relaunched Google TV from the old Android TV. Right. Great product, not marketed. Like nobody knows. I mean, I think the kind of digital tech savvy, media savvy world knows it's the best product right now, but Google doesn't market. And look, one of the things that we always think about in the coverage of media and technology is that for whatever reason, time and time again, single purpose companies tend to win. Just generally, not always, but tend to win. If you think about Netflix, right? Netflix had no right to be the leader in this category, given the strength and success of all the other companies that you and I know that, tried to do things in this space. Spotify crushed Apple, right? Like Apple was the de facto leader in music, digital music, and now Spotify is the de facto leader.
Yeah.
Roku, if you think about it, Google does lots of other things. Amazon does lots of other things. Samsung works great on their TVs, but it only works on their TVs. Vizio does an incredible job on their TVs, but it only works on their TVs. Now, I think what you're going to start to see in 21 is more companies try to go cross-platform. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see a Samsung or a Vizio, Comcast with their X1. I think you're going to see more and more tvOS platforms because I think everyone is realizing that tvOS is so powerful, not just for TV, but for gaming, for the creator economy. I mean, if you walk up to you were just mentioning the Google TV device. If you hold down the voice assistant, which is Google Assistant, and you say Roblox, immediately pops up every video of watching, somebody play Roblox or Minecraft hacks. Like,
yep.
The integration of, I think we often forget. We all know that Netflix is the most used streaming app. What everyone forgets on televisions, the number 2 streaming app is YouTube. And so the blending of premium content, user-generated content, gaming, think about Twitch and like that, you're actually going to be gaming. Obviously, gaming has exploded. So gaming on the TV, Stadia, kind of cloud gaming. There's so many reasons to want to control that home TV experience or that home living room experience. I think you're going to see a much more intense war. Roku clearly isn't going anywhere. I think the question will be, how does their market share change as the others, which should have been aggressive and were, I don't want to say sleeping, but really everyone let Roku run away with this. It'll be interesting to see whether that changes or whether Roku's lead is just so far and away ahead that nobody can catch up now.
So Disney,
Sure.
My former company, right after we did our last thing for NYVC Sports in early May, you noted the various COVID-related major problems the company had. Theme parks closed, cruise ships docked, movies shut down, accelerated cord cutting. And
Sure.
You came out with the sell on the company and a target and a stock price, I think, of 85. Today, when I checked, it was 176. You did a mea culpa last week. You know, like again, these things happen. But what's going through your mind? You know, you change the outlook to neutral. So it isn't necessarily like you're on the bandwagon. I'm interested in your current point of view.
You have to. I mean, look, our goal as analysts is to be right more than we're wrong. I mean, the reality is, nobody gets every stock right every day, or they'd be sitting on a desert island enjoying life rather than just doing this job. The reality is we all make mistakes. We got to own up to those mistakes. And I think in many ways, sun shining and shining a light on your failures is even more important than taking congratulations and taking victory laps on your winners. We learn a lot from making mistakes. And I think in this case, what was surprising is you're right. I mean, everything went wrong for Disney. They had the two worst quarters, I think, in the company's history. I mean, literally losing money across the last couple of quarters, and the stock rocketed to an all-time high. Now, part of that is obviously the belief that the pandemic's going to come to an end. It's obviously a bit more delayed than we all hoped. But the reality of why Disney is at $177 is that the company has leaned far more heavily and faster into streaming. So not only has Disney Plus, forget about Hulu, forget about ESPN Plus, that's all just a sideshow. Disney Plus has dramatically exceeded expectations. We came into this year, our 20 for 20. I remember walking at CES, and I remember talking to a bunch of people at our cocktail party that we had that night that I think you were at. We were forecasting 50 million subs for year one for Disney Plus, which after the 10 million, which was big. People thought we were nuts. I mean, people were at the cocktail party saying, I don't know what you're smoking. That's ridiculous. They obviously exceeded that number within, a couple of months. They got to, 80 plus million subscribers. I think it's the view that they, this analyst day they had a few weeks ago where they're talking about doubling their spending, putting an array of content that shows you that they really understand. This isn't about putting up The Mandalorian once a year and then that's it. It's about having a robust, meaning every few weeks there's going to be something major on Disney Plus. That meeting dramatically changed our thinking about how Disney recognizes it. And I think while they didn't say it, all the body language speaks to a more meaningful change in the movie business. I watched Alan Braverman gave a kind of a rare interview a few weeks ago where he talked about probably the single greatest challenge. He's the general counsel of Disney. He said the single greatest challenge of his career probably is what's happening right now, where the entire economic model, trying to figure out how the entire economic model of the media business shifts, because you're moving from, this is how you get paid, right? Like somebody gets a little bit up front and then makes money on profit participations as it goes through a series of sequential windows, whether it's movies or TV shows, to a model where content just premieres. It's called, effectively, in many ways, they call it like self-dealing, right? Like you're putting your content onto your own platform rather than selling it to a third party or putting it out into a theater or onto a streaming service. Dealing with that is so challenging, but all it had me thinking about, John, is that Disney is just waiting. They're preparing and getting ready because they know this pandemic is lasting longer than anyone thought. Movie theater business will certainly reopen and come back, but it's never going to come back to what it once was. And I think Disney is making meaningful preparations to see more of its movies go direct to streaming. Like I think they've seen, when you look at what happened with Hamilton, when you look at Soul, Soul is still the top title. 3 weeks later, Soul is still the top title on Disney Plus. Why? Because it went direct to streaming. It didn't go to
on a holiday too. I think those two examples use the power of like everyone. We're all cooped up on July 4th. We're all cooped up on Christmas Day, and so they came in with a big attraction, right?
And people loved it. And look, it wasn't like just Soul worked. Wonder Woman did big numbers. Wonder Woman had a bigger subscriber impact from the data we saw from Antenna Analytics. Wonder Woman had a bigger impact on HBO Max subs than Hamilton had on Disney Plus, and that was a huge impact back over the summer. So I think. Well, my point is, I think the studios are starting to recognize what Netflix has known for years, that exclusive direct-to-streaming movies are really valuable, can really move the needle on subscribers, can really enhance the value proposition, and have substantial library value. I mean, one of the funniest things is Mulan, which Disney sold for $30 extra as part of Disney Plus, and was sort of widely ridiculed as a quote unquote failure of the kind of premium charge extra model. Mulan is now available for free on Disney Plus. And I noticed a couple of days ago, it was surged back into the top 10. This is the live action Mulan. And I think it just shows you the power of included, it's not free because obviously you're paying every month, but the included value of content resonates with consumers, and you'll have a lot more ability to grow subs and drive ARPU if you build the value proposition for the consumer. Yeah. That's a huge learning from 2020 that I think you'll see play out in 2021 for a lot of companies, including Disney.
I was also going to say that management at Disney, Kevin Mayer, who's no longer there, Bob Iger, Bob Chapek, who's now the CEO, Aaron LaBerge, who's the head of technology for direct to consumer. I think they understood, and you've been a proponent, I have too, that the street valued Netflix and the Netflix story, so that if they could create their own story about why they were a meaningful challenger to Netflix, that they might get valued that way as opposed. And frankly, Kevin and Bob's decision to price it the way they did originally, I think looks kind of brilliant in retrospect. At the time, it seemed like a big gamble.
And I'll go even a step further. I mean, I give Disney credit. They have 25 plus million subscribers in India at essentially no ARPU. They're basically given away.
Star subs, right?
Right. They're part of Hotstar. They're basically given away. But the street looks at those 25. I mean, in reality, they didn't beat the 50 million forecast we had by that much. We just never anticipated them giving it away to 25 million homes in India. But the brilliance of Disney's move is Wall Street has rewarded them.
Right. Yep.
It's been brilliant. And John, I'll go a step further. Not only have they exploded past expectations, but Wall Street doesn't even, with Netflix, obviously, all you have is the new business. There is no legacy business. What's been amazing to watch with Disney, what we clearly got wrong, was that they haven't penalized Disney for the pressure it's going to exert on the legacy business. Like Disney Plus being more successful, Hulu being more successful, obviously hurts ABC, hurts ESPN. Nobody cares. At least for now, nobody cares in this market environment. We clearly did not expect that to happen.
Okay. So anybody who follows your timeline is now kind of up to speed on Fubo. Okay. So here's my question. Okay. Of everybody I know, I would say you are one of the most open-minded guys about new technologies, new approaches, new leadership. Companies that I was very skeptical about, Vice, for instance, like I felt like you've had a lot more patience for stuff that went on there than I did. And I give you a lot of credit for it, but not Fubo. So tell us what's going on here. And I'm interested, not that you don't necessarily believe the Fubo story. What surprised me a little bit is just the vehemence of it. So I'm trying to understand that.
So I'd say there's a couple things. One is everything has a price and value, right? So I mean, we were big believers in digital media when they had hundreds of millions of dollars of valuations. When these things started to get to, I think of Refinery 29, and you can go through a long list. BuzzFeed. I mean, BuzzFeed getting up, not selling to Disney for $1 billion, and we'll see if it actually ends up going public this year. But right. We are laser focused on new disruptive technologies and how digital can impact and transform the media industry overall. And so we spend a lot of time. I mean, Fubo was something that I got to know back in 2016 and was fascinated by. I mean, wrote about, profiled. Dave came to speak at one of our conferences. Right. I loved it. But again, this was a small early stage startup with a very low valuation. So this is less about, do I think it's interesting what they're doing? They were trying to create a small, again, the original Fubo story was, we're going to create a soccer focused, an international soccer focused, sub $10 a month, VMVPD, grow slowly, and try to build a business. We now have a company that has a valuation today of $6 billion that has 550,000 subscribers, loses money on every one of those subscribers, says they'll make it up in advertising later, and now is talking about trying to be a sports betting company. Look, you and I both know the sports betting business extremely well. It's a business of scale and, more importantly, capital. I mean, DraftKings, I think, spent $200 million on marketing last quarter. We've seen people try to dabble, right? Score, right, has tried to dabble. I think they've gotten I think their handle in Q4 was $15 million. Like, it was completely irrelevant what they were able to attain in states like New Jersey. It's a business that requires such scale and such investment. And here's the problem, John. The problem is, even if you believed that Fubo had the technology to compete with a company like DraftKings or FanDuel, they only have $200 million of cash, and they're burning cash on their core business. And so I just don't understand, like, you got to like separate interesting entrepreneur, very good salesperson, with the fact of, like, what is the actual long-term business and valuation. And so this is more looking at it going, Fubo just isn't worth, it's not worth $6 billion. It's not worth $3 billion. Could it be worth, 500 million or high hundreds of millions? Sure, it could be. And there's certainly asset value that somebody could look at that. But to believe that it's worth $6 billion and they're going to rival DraftKings and compete with DraftKings in sports betting, or that it's going to rival Roku in advertising. I mean, let's just be clear. Roku's going to do $1 billion in connected TV advertising. Fubo last quarter did 7 million. So we're just comparing apples and oranges. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes some of these stocks get caught up in retail mania, where there isn't really the true understanding of actual value and how to value a company, and things get caught up in hype. And so you get these dislocations. And so, when we see dislocations, we get very aggressive and very vocal.
Okay. Well, I think we trade places on this one. And, just for disclosure, David Stearns, my friend, former boss, former partner, was an original investor in Fubo and loves David Gandler. I've gotten to know David Gandler well over the last few years, as you have. I don't have any official position in Fubo. I just would say I think he's a super smart guy, and he has navigated so far. I just feel like it's early, so I can't tell you that you won't be correct. I'm just like, the vehemence or the determination about it now is for me. I still think it's somewhat of an open issue, but I just wanted to bring it up and cover it.
Look, we're going to find out. I mean, the reality is,
well,
look, we've seen Sony exit the business, right? Sony shut it down. They couldn't even sell it.
Too.
Right. It literally, Sony couldn't find a buyer. Like, it's such a troubled business that Sony couldn't even find someone to buy it for any amount of money. So it's an interesting spot to be in. And look, I think part of the problem goes back to what you talked about at the beginning. The programmers are not your friend, right? The problem with the programmers is they want everything carried. They don't allow you to pick and choose. I mean, this isn't just a Dave Gandler Fubo issue. This is a whole industry issue.
No, it's right? A whole industry issue. Yeah.
AT&T, let's go back. Let's just review DirecTV Now. The premise of DirecTV Now was, we're going to offer you a smaller, thinner bundle at a lower price. And instead, they got jammed with the same channels, forced to take all the same things that everyone else has. And all of a sudden, same thing with YouTube TV, right? I may love the service as a user, but they take all the same channels. They now have Viacom. They have Discovery. Everybody gets forced to take everything. The programmers don't allow you to pick and choose. And so it leads to these bloated bundles. And everyone is in the same boat of charging too much and not having the flexibility. If you woke up tomorrow and you could pick and choose what channels you wanted, this would be a very different story. But you can't. Nobody can do that, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah. The last thing I'd add, just from my thing, and it's covered in the predictions, is we're really seeing tremendous growth in podcasting. For those in the audience who don't subscribe, I'd recommend you subscribe to Rich's podcast. He, Brandon, and Walt do a really good 45 minutes to an hour every Friday that lists all the issues that come up. If for anybody who wants to kind of stay abreast of what's happening, these guys do a really good job. Rich, I'm not exactly positive where that business is going, other than it's growing and you can kind of feel it. Again, feels like kind of like a step change just in a year, just the expansion of podcasting and
The breadth
creation
of
of new
content,
products.
right? The breadth of content
Breadth of
is
content.
just astounding, right? Like it's like it reminds me of like who doesn't have a podcast now? Right? Like everyone
Right.
is starting a podcast. Just like, you mentioned your son is a creator on YouTube. Like, these are like, it's like one of the things to do is like, hey, I'm going to create a podcast now and I can build a following. And
Yeah.
sort of everyone is, and the reason I think it's happening is twofold, maybe threefold. Obviously, the explosion of AirPods, connected devices, connected cars, speakers, etc. But I think there's two other really important elements. One is you can multitask, right? Like you can be walking, you can be on the soccer field watching your kid, you can be, at the gym when you went to gyms, but theoretically, you could multitask, and audio is a background activity that you can do while you do other things. I can even be reading my phone while I'm listening to a podcast. So it actually expands the amount of time you can touch media in a day. And I think people find a lot of value they can get a lot of information. I mean, we even read our research now and people listen to our research versus reading our research. For some people, they put it on 1.5 speed and they can quickly consume far faster than they could read and have to pull up a website. But then the other piece of it is, I think from the creator standpoint and the listener, there's an intimacy, right? Like speaking into your ear. I think you really feel like you get to know the person, and there's something just so intimate. And you think about the early days, I mean, pre-television, right? Like the early days of radio, like there's just something about it. I mean, think about the early days of listening to Howard Stern, right? Like just, go back to like how, even remember TV used to just basically be radio and with a screen. Like there's something just intimate about listening to somebody and hearing them tell a story or talk about something. I think it's just a really interesting way for a creator to build their relationship with the fan or with the consumer. And people love that intimacy. And I think that intimacy over time, which is why I think companies like Spotify, and now you saw Amazon bought Wondery. I think it's that intimacy that people realize that you can build a very big business around. Not just itself, like it's not a business, it's a good business, but I think it's also, once you have people's time and attention, what else can you do with it?
Exactly.
And then how do you take those brands and turn them into other media properties? I mean, it's a really cheap form of IP creation too. I mean, you're seeing, Dr. Death is going to be on Peacock this year. It came from a podcast from Wondery. You're seeing more and more of that sort of transformation, or just like you would use books to turn into movies or TV shows. Podcasts are becoming the new, kind of book, in a sense of IP creation. Test it out, learn, see what works, and then turn it into something far bigger. So I think it may not even be just directly the ad revenue that comes with podcasting. I think there's a lot of other ways to build value that we're just beginning.
I agree. So Rich, thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy CES. Stay safe and well.
And John, hopefully by this time next year, we're doing this live and in person.
In Las Vegas.
In Vegas. That is my hope, is that 1 year from now, we are shaking hands and having a cocktail. Because if we don't, I don't know how much longer I can imagine sitting inside.
I gotcha. Jeff, back to you.
There's nobody better. Both of you guys, truly. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you for bringing up David Stern. It was almost, a year? It's been a year and 2 weeks since David passed. He's obviously always been a front runner and had foresight and a prognosticator. So getting out of the way of 2020 may have been his final mile. I think we all miss him and his vision and his mentorship. So thank you for bringing him up. These events are great. We love the content and we love the discussion, but you're absolutely right. Like CES, there's nothing better than the networking that goes along with it. So the sooner that we can get back to all of that. I don't know if you guys know what networking is. It was this thing we used to do. And
over a beer.
And before we get on a plane, we'd see each other in person. Maybe we'll bump elbows. I don't know, kick a toe, something like that. Tonight, the launch of the NHL. I heard someone say earlier today, it'll be a puck drop unlike any other, which I think is a nice sort of message to all that goes on in sports. So that'll be fun. And to your point about watching together, we've seen so many ideas around how do you watch together. And I think we'll be great to start to figure out how all that works. But you're right, there are a lot of complications around all of it. So in conclusion, or to wrap, check out Lightshed's website and all 21 predictions for 21. You got an extra one this year than you got last year, and you get one new one next year. And thanks to all of our panelists. The conversations were tremendous. They were meaningful. They were fun. They were thoughtful. All of this will be available on VOD, where we'll cut out some of the transitions and have a good time. And to people that are watching our office hours and our programming, if you have any ideas, thoughts, panelists, ideas, this is your community. So please don't be bashful as far as reaching out to us with ideas. We'd love to make them happen. So with that, happy New Year, and stay healthy, gentlemen. And we'll talk soon. And as always, truly from all of us, thank you.
Thank you.